This week on The Real Review, it's all about Chardonnay. We're doing a buying guide to Chardonnay, so everything is Chardonnay. Chardonnay is the number one selling white wine in Australia. As far as the grapes and the vineyards go, it's the number one planted grapevine as well for white wines. All around the world, people love Chardonnay, and of course it started in Burgundy. Burgundy produces the original great Chardonnay of the world, which a lot of people try to copy. But here we are in Australia with many, many different regions which produce great Chardonnay. And they all do it slightly differently, not necessarily trying to copy Burgundy, but trying to do something that's faithful to their own region and their own vineyard. So what I've got here is just 8 different Chardonnays from Australia lined up in roughly south to north order, starting with the coolest climate wine from Tasmania. A lovely, fresh, delicate, but also complex cool climate Chardonnay with lovely, fresh, cool climate acidity. Next one on the list is from Mornington Peninsula, and that is Prancing Horse. These people are doing a more Burgundy style of Chardonnay with a bit of malolactic, which gives it a buttery sort of character and a richness to it. It's still a cool climate, but it's a more fuller-bodied, rich style of Chardonnay. Then we go to the Yarra Valley, and that's Santorin. Santorin's vineyard that they're getting the grapes from is in the upper Yarra Valley, Gladysdale it's called, high altitude. Again, delicate, refined, high acidity, very refreshing, beautiful wine, but also very complex wine. I think Chardonnay really is the variety that encapsulates intensity of flavour, richness, generosity, and complexity at the same time, partly because it's nearly always aged in wood, usually fermented in wood in barrels, but there are many other techniques used in Chardonnay making as well which enhance its complexity. Moving on to Beechworth. Of course, Beechworth is home to Gioconda, which is probably Australia's highest ranking Chardonnay with most of the critics around the world. This is not Gioconda though, this is Secret Village from Indigo Vineyards, which is very, very good wine indeed. I think it's only a small region, Beechworth, but it's making some of the most spectacular Chardonnay in Australia these days. Moving up to the Adelaide Hills, Petaluma. Petaluma is a famous name, of course, known to everybody. The yellow label is very familiar, but this one is a particularly interesting Chardonnay from Petaluma. They've only been making it for a couple of years. It's called the Anova, A-N-O-V-A. So it's a special wine, quite expensive, $140 a bottle. Still cheaper than a lot of Burgundy, of course. A beautiful wine, Adelaide Hills, undoubtedly the best region in South Australia for making Chardonnay, has a great affinity with the grape. Moving on to Orange, New South Wales. So we're getting up in latitude here. We're going further north. Orange is, of course, in the central west of New South Wales. It's quite northerly in latitude, but it's very high in altitude, which gives it a cool climate. This is from a guy called Jeff Byrne, and it's named Byrne Farm. It's family winery in the Orange region. Very complex wine, refined, subtle, but also has that complexity from the cool climate, maybe with a touch of malolactic. I'm not entirely sure. It's grown at about 900 metres altitude, which is why it's a cool climate. This wine is particularly good value for money. It's only $35, which I think is one of the great values going around at the moment in Chardonnay. So a couple of other wines here. We're still going sort of northerly. Tyrrell's, famous wine. The first commercial Chardonnay in Australia of an ongoing lineage was Tyrrell's Vat 47. First vintage of it was 1971. Murray Tyrrell planted the vineyard in 1968. After he realised that Chardonnay, which was really pretty well unknown in Australia at the time, he realised there was a vineyard in the Hunter that had some Chardonnay vines, so he pinched some cuttings, planted them himself in his own vineyard. 3 years later, produced the first Chardonnay, which became Vat 47. Very famous wine. Now it's $110 a bottle, so it's not cheap, but it's still a great wine. I think it's a greater wine than it ever was these days. They've been refining the style and producing better and better wines. People would say quite often, how come the Hunter, which is a warm, sort of almost subtropical region, how can it produce great white wines? But it's a great anomaly, the Hunter Valley. It's a bit of a puzzle, but it does produce great wine. Here's the wine here, and let's just have a sniff. It's got that lovely, waxy, buttery, slightly dairy, stone fruits, a bit of smokiness from the barrels, beautiful complex nose. Just delicious, just makes you want to have a sip straight away. But I'm going to restrain myself for the moment. and move on to the final wine, which is Margaret River, of course. And Margaret River is perhaps these days the most attention-grabbing region in Australia, certainly one of them. Famous for its Cabernet, but Chardonnay as well. I think that those two grapes of Margaret River. This is from Robert Oatley, and it's called the Pennant. It's their top Chardonnay. It's $105 a bottle, not cheap, but they do produce quite a lot of Chardonnays which are cheaper than this, mostly from Margaret River. This is a wine that's been fermented 100% in French oak, 100% new French oak, which is quite unusual. We'll taste that in a minute, but we'll see what that is like, because 100% new oak is a lot. This one, I suspect Tyrrell's VAT 47 is less than 50% new oak these days. Almost a single vineyard wine from the Short Flat Vineyard, which is one of the original great Tyrrell's vineyards. Let's have a taste again. Wow, it's got a lot going on. Gosh, the intensity of flavour is just astonishing, but it's soft and it's delightful. It coats the mouth with flavour. It's got incredibly long finish, rich generosity. Chardonnay should have generosity. Even delicate Chardonnays like Chablis, for example, which is all made from Chardonnay, can be very linear and very lean and quite high in acidity. But in the main part of Burgundy, which is the Côte de Beaune, the Chardonnays there are nearly always rich and generous wines with a lot of complexity, a lot of amplitude on the palate, and that's exactly what they get in Hunter with Tyrrell's VAT 47. That's a pretty special wine indeed. This wine here, which is the Robert Oatley from Margaret River, because Margaret River is kicking a lot of goals these days with Chardonnay. And they produce them at various levels of price as well. This one, as I said, is expensive, but there are many great value Chardonnays in Margaret River which are, half or a third of that price. Let's have a look. And yes, you can certainly smell that it's been in oak. There's a lovely toasty, nutty character about it, which it's not excessive. I would never call this wine over oak. It has a good, generous contribution from the barrels. Oh, the intensity of flavour is just mesmerising. That really has penetrating flavour. It just goes on and on and on in the mouth. Fabulous wine. One of the things about Margaret River is they have the clone called the Gin clone, which is not entirely specific to Margaret River, but Margaret River is its home, I guess, where it's made its home. And that contributes to the generosity of a lot of the Chardonnays from that region, because it has what they call hen and chicken. It has bad fruit set, which means that there are tiny berries as well as fully grown berries on the bunch, and that results in concentrated flavour and high acidity. It's a bit of an accident of nature, but it's just part of what makes Margaret River great. So there we have it, 8 wonderful Chardonnays from 8 regions of Australia, each of them with its own personality, thanks to its own climate and soil types, all of them great and valid expressions of the Chardonnay grape. There are people who say, no thanks, I don't drink Chardonnay. But the answer to that is, well, what kind of Chardonnay don't you like? Because there are so many different kinds of Chardonnay. We can have delicate, unwooded, fruit-driven Chablis styles on one hand, of which Chablis is obviously the prime example. On the other hand, you can have rich, golden, full-bodied, oaky, buttery, rich, generous wines on the other hand, and somewhere in between can be many, many different iterations of Chardonnay. So go to the Real Review website, click on the Chardonnay buying guide, and find the style of Chardonnay that suits your taste and your pocket. Cheers.